In order to answer what emotions are, I want to start this episode with a different approach where I'm going to talk about what emotions are not. In this way, we can exclude the things that there are not emotions, but they can be mistakenly taken as being emotions. First of all, emotions are not personality traits. Personality traits are the tendencies that determine an individual's characteristics, behavior, and thoughts. The personality trait is stable over time and difficult to change throughout a person's life. A person can be an extrovert, or be high on openness, or be a disagreeable person. Emotions are not moods. Mood is the way a person feels. A mood is less specific than an emotion and can last for days or even longer. It can be triggered by an emotion or an event, and can be positive or negative. Emotions are not thoughts. Thoughts are the flow of ideas and associations, and they do not have behavioral expressions. Emotions are not reflexes. Reflexes are involuntary responses to stimulus, and they don't need conscious thought to occur. Now let's talk about what emotions are. Emotions are sensations originated in the mind that create a motivational drive that direct faculties like memory or intelligence to initiate action to pursue a specific goal. They can be triggered by an event, by a memory, or by a thought. They can trigger bodily changes as heartbeat, breathing, gland secretion, as well as behavioral responses such as characteristic facial expressions. Emotions emerged in the course of evolution, helping us to cope with the challenges in the world and to socialize with other people. They give organisms a high degree of flexibility to meet the demands of life. The kind of events that an organism must be able to cope with are those that threaten its well-being by either avoiding or neutralize the danger. The danger of a predator, for instance, could trigger an emotional response by cues such as smell or sight of a shadow. At the same time, an organism enters into an acute stress response. The reaction starts in the brain where the amygdala, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland are activated. The adrenal glands are also activated, allowing cortisol and adrenaline to be released in the body. Heartbeat and blood flow increase. Energy is made available by the availability of glucose and fatty acids, and the organism is ready to react. There is a variety of emotions. We may feel angry, fearful, ashamed, or happy. And it depends on the circumstances, depends on our mental states, depends also how we interpret the situation. The emotions are accompanied by bodily states and also expressions such as facial expressions and body language. They arise under distinct conditions, and what follows is a short description of some of them. Anger. Anger is the emotional reaction to circumstances that are stressful or offensive, and it is approach-oriented. Approach-oriented means that when angry, the person has the urge to engage or deal with what is considered the source of anger. It can involve hostile or aggressive responses, and it is an important component for survival. Anger provides aggressive instincts against a threat. Fear. Fear is a powerful emotion and essential to avoid threats and danger. It motivates an organism to protect itself from the harmful effects of the thing that triggers a fear. The state of fear gives rise to biochemical and behavioral changes. It drives an organism to flight away from a threat or has an overpowering freezing effect. Joy. Joy is a feeling of great pleasure and happiness. It is associated with the feeling of excitement and linked to the reward system in the brain. It informs an organism that an event is favorable and motivates it to be engaged to the event that is the source of joy. Surprise. Surprise is an emotion that can have an intrinsic attractiveness or averseness. That means that the emotion can be either positive or negative, depending on the context where the emotion takes place. It has a function to prepare an organism to adapt to a sudden change in the environment. Theories about emotions. Behavioristic and cognitive approaches. I want to present to you with different theories about how people feel emotions. I'm going to start with an early theory of emotion that was first proposed by James and Lang independently in the late 19th century. We start with the idea that we need to have three elements for the emotion to be produced. The stimulus, which could be a threat triggering fear or anger, or a pleasant situation that could give rise to joy. The physiological reaction. It might be the activation of the adrenal glands and the release of cortisol and adrenaline. Or the activation of the reward system and the release of dopamine. The feeling. The actual feeling of anger, joy, or fear as it is felt by the organism. According to the James Lang theory of emotion, there is the stimulus and then the response, by which the physiological reaction comes before the feeling itself. For instance, for me to experience anger, the corresponding bodily reactions have to occur to produce the feeling. The sequence of emotion is stimulus, physiological change, and feeling. Rejecting that feeling comes before the physiological changes. According to this theory, your body will react before the emotion is consciously felt. The implications are that before experiencing the feeling of an emotion, your body has already triggered the corresponding mechanism. Assuming that some emotions have distinct physiological changes, it would be possible to cause a feeling to take place by stimulating the body mirroring an emotion. Experiments were conducted to assess if, by manipulating facial expressions showing faces of anger, fear, happiness, sadness, or surprise, while the participants' body activity was being monitored, it would be possible to give rise to the corresponding emotion. Results showed that voluntary facial activity produced significant levels of subjective experience of the associated emotion with all its components. What it means is, people that make a happy face feel happy and experience physiological changes in the body which are associated with joy. The same thing if you make a sad face while holding your body posture as if you are sad or defeated. By holding it for long enough, it will make your body believe that you feel sad, opening the doors to the feeling itself. Cognitive approach to emotion. So far we have been thinking about stimulus and response, and the type of emotional response is solely caused by the stimulus without taking into account how people is perceiving the situation. It works where there is a person walking in the jungle, the person senses the presence of a tiger, the stimulus can only mean danger and the fear response is triggered. However, in a complex human social environment where there are no natural predators, the context of each stimulus and the way people interpret it has to be taken into account. Another important point is about where the stimulus comes from. Emotions can arise because of concrete stimulus such as the ones in real life, but it can also arise because of cognition such as thought or memory, and it can be from something abstract like music. The cognitive approach to emotions is concerned with the conscious meaning that an event can have by trying to understand the ideas, feelings, and wishes that a person can have related to the event. It means that the person makes a value judgment on what the stimulus means, if it is positive or negative, and how important it is. Furthermore, a distinction has to be made between public and private meaning. The public meaning is the objective definition of the event without personal significance or connotation. The personal meaning is the personal interpretation of the event, and it may not be in line with reality because the person can misinterpret the situation. This is how the same external events can have different meanings for two different people, and depending on the interpretation a person makes, he will feel sad, angry, or proud, or he will have no particular emotion at all. Let's get all these concepts and illustrate it with an example to see if we can understand it better. Let's think about a classroom with a couple dozen kids. We have teacher there as well. So these kids, they had an exam the previous month, and now the teacher is telling the grades achieved in the last exam, and the teacher remarks that one of the students, let's call the student Peter, got a low grade. So, with the knowledge that Peter got a low grade, other students will react depending on their position, on their personal experience, and each one will have a personal meaning of what Peter's low grade means. One student could react and think, "Oh great, that means that I'm better than him." Another student, which is Peter's best friend, may be feeling a bit down due to sympathy. And then there's some students that they could feel anxious, thinking, if he didn't do well, I didn't either. And others could even feel surprised as they interpret that the teacher was being unfair by giving Peter a low grade. And finally, if you have a new student arriving and this student has no understanding of all the context of the situation, the new student will have no emotional response at all, as this grade has no meaning to him whatsoever. So that's what we mean by personal meaning, because each student in this situation interpret the grading in a different way. In this approach, there is stimulus, conscious meaning, and emotion. Basic and dimensional theories of emotion. Let's look at two other theories of emotion: basic emotion by Paul Ekman and the theory of constructed emotion as proposed by Lisa Barrett. According to the basic emotion theory, humans have a limited number of emotions that differ one from another in important ways. They differ in valence, in behavioral response, and in the situation these emotions take place. Emotions can be classified into positive and negative. Negative emotions include anger, disgust, sadness, or contempt. Positive emotions include amusement, pride in achievement, satisfaction, relief, and contentment. According to this classical view, these emotions are present in all humans, regardless of culture. They evolve as tools to help us to deal with fundamental challenges in life, and each one directs us to act in the most appropriate way to achieve a necessary goal. Because emotions are universal, the facial expressions associated with each distinctive emotion can be recognized by everyone from birth. In his research, Paul Ekman reported that there are 6 basic emotions that can be consistently recognized by facial expression: happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, fear, and disgust. There are other expressions that can be conveyed by the face, but these have not been firmly established by research. There are challenges common to all people dealing with recurrent adaptive situations, and emotions help us to face dangers, overcome losses, or progress towards goals. Emotions are also important to relationship and communication between people. Theory of constructed emotion. According to this theory, there is no universality to basic emotions. Emotions concepts are necessary to identify emotions in faces, and the way people express it is heavily influenced by culture. People cannot consistently identify a facial expression by itself without the context of emotion concepts like anger, sadness, or happiness. When Dr. Liza Barrett did her research with a culture not influenced by Western society, she could not find that there are a limited number of basic universal emotions just looking at facial expressions. People perceive others as happy or sad or angry by looking how the face looks like, how body language is being expressed, by evaluating voices and sounds, and by the overall context of the situation, as well as the culture or the environment the person is in. Now I quote her book, How Emotions Are Made. We find that emotions are not built in but made from more basic parts. They are not universal but vary from culture to culture. They are not triggered, you create them. They emerge as a combination of physical properties of your body, a flexible brain that wires itself to whatever environment it develops, and your culture and upbringing, which provide the environment. Emotions are real, but not in the objective sense that molecules or neurons are real. They are real in the same sense that money is real. That is, hardly an illusion, but a product of human agreement. On stress and negative emotion. Now let's talk about stress. Stress is the tension resulting from an environment which demands, exceeds an individual's capacity to cope with the challenges, and where the conscious meaning of the event is regarded as important. When a situation is significant to the self and people don't have the resources to deal with it properly, they tend to feel high levels of stress. Some emotions as anger or anxiety usually arise from stress. The more stress people feel, the more they are likely to show angry emotions or feel anxious. The way people think also causes negative emotions. Uncontrolled thoughts can open the door to rumination, which is the repetitive thinking on negative events, focusing on the causes, possible solutions, and trying to find the meaning of it. Ruminating can increase anger and open the door to anxiety. Daily stress can also affect emotion, as a study shows that interpersonal conflicts, like arguments between couples, are the most important kind of daily stresses, and they have a negative impact on mood. Understanding the stress response. Now that we have established that people under stress can experience more negative emotions, it would be interesting to make a distinction between acute and chronic stress. The body under stress releases more cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones, they impact several bodily functions. Acute stress happens when there are threats or surprise, and the stress will go away when the event is no longer present. It is a natural response. Whereas chronic stress is ongoing and persists for a long period of time. It can have a negative impact on health and well-being, and people with serious issues such as marital difficulties, life-threatening illnesses, and unemployment can be more vulnerable to chronic stress. Now, stress affects different bodily functions, and I'm going to describe shortly how it affects different parts of the body. Digestion. Stress can disrupt the digestive system by causing acid reflux, diarrhea, or constipation. Circulatory system. Stress can cause blood pressure to go up, and in turn the heart has to pump harder and faster. Memory. High levels of stress can cause memory disorders, as high concentration of stress hormones can cause atrophy of the hippocampus, the region that regulates memory. On anxiety. Everyone has feelings of anxiety at some point in life. Anxiety is significant in modern life, and it's estimated that there are 3 million people in the UK with anxiety disorders. Anxiety is a protective mechanism as an expression of self-preservation responses, which is an essential mechanism for alerting us to things that can cause harm. It is the general feeling of uneasy, worry, and even fear, and it can be perfectly normal. The trouble starts when people cannot control their worries, when the feelings of anxiety are constant and negatively impact one's daily life. Symptoms of anxiety can include nausea, sweating, muscle tension, or hyperventilation. Uncontrolled worries can lead to anxiety disorders such as panic attack or phobias. Phobias are excessive fears of a situation or object, and I will dedicate the rest of this video to talk about the mechanism of fear in order to give you an idea about how it is structured, and in turn I hope that it will help you to give a better understanding of these processes. Phobias or irrational fears can be caused when people overestimate the dangers of a threat and underestimate their capacity to cope with it. As I go along, I will give you examples as well. Anxiety disorders such as panic attacks or phobias are thought to be caused and maintained in part by a disturbance of information processing that leads to an overestimation of danger or perceived threat, and an associated underestimation of personal ability to cope. Let's see how a phobia can manifest itself using the example of an individual's relationship with elevators. And we are going to use Mary as our subject. Imagine that Mary always used elevators and never had any issue with it. Here are her cognitions or thoughts about her relationship with elevators, broken down by components. Number 1. There's information about the stimulus. Quote, elevators take me from one floor to the other. Now number 2. There's information about the behavior. Quote, I use elevators when I can. Number 3. The interpretation of the meaning of the relationship between stimulus and response. I quote, I save time when I use elevators. Now, take into account that her cognitions are: elevators take me from one floor to the other, I use elevators when I can, and I save time when I use elevators. Let's create a situation which will induce Mary to have a phobia of elevators. To do so, I'm going to tell a story, and along with it, I'm going to share the elements necessary for the disorder to take place. The first information to keep in mind is: fear can develop due to traumatic experiences through conditioning. Now the story. Mary one day takes the elevator. She is alone and it's evening. The elevator stops working and Mary is stuck there for a long time until someone comes to rescue her. I'm going to give you a second information to keep in mind now. The meaning of the event determines the emotional response to it. Back to the story. Since the incident, Mary has been reluctant of using this specific elevator. She is afraid of getting stuck in there again and she uses it reluctantly. Now I'm going to give you a third piece of information to keep in mind. Fear is maintained and can grow through avoidance learning. Back to the story. Time has passed and Mary has been changing her behavior. She never takes elevators alone. If there is no one around, she uses the stairs, and when she is about to enter an elevator, she feels uneasy and her hands get very sweaty. Okay, I will give you a fourth piece of information now to keep in mind. And remember that all these pieces of information that I'm giving you, they are going to help you to understand all this process. Now the information is, unchecked anxiety can grow into a disorder. Back to the story. After some time, Mary started feeling very anxious with only the thought of having to enter an elevator, and now she only uses the stairs. If she has to enter one, she feels panic. Okay, let's wrap this up with Mary's story. So the first thing that Mary, in the beginning, she always used elevators, never had a problem. One specific day, she got stuck in the elevator, and it was for a long time, it was very uncomfortable, and since then she got reluctant of taking this specific elevator because of fear of getting stuck there again. Over time, this fear expanded up to the point that she feels very anxious with only the thought of entering any elevator. And if she gets stuck in the elevator, if she has to use the elevator, she has the feeling of panic. The conditions for this elevator phobia to take place are the following. Fear to elevator developed due to traumatic experience through conditioning. The meaning of using elevator has been distorted and now is associated with getting trapped in there. Through avoidance learning, the fear to elevators grew until getting out of hand. And, due to this vicious cycle, Mary now has a phobia of closed space, claustrophobia. Now that we went through the process of how Mary can end up with a phobia of elevators, let's explore a process that could be used to address this issue. The thoughts are monitored by identifying and labeling the cognitive distortions. Mary starts to monitor her thoughts, identifying the negative thoughts in relation to her phobia and taking notes of the cause and effect associations in regards to using the lift. When she feels anxious, why is that so, and etc. By controlled exposure to the conditioned stimulus, the learned response is decreased. Instead of totally avoiding the elevator, Mary makes an effort in getting close to it and gradually using the elevator more and more. The situation is analyzed and the emotional meaning is restructured. Mary analyzes what the real situation is, that elevators are safe and they seldom malfunction, and then she restructures her private meaning by understanding that her perception is distorted and it has to be adjusted back into reality. Mary believes about her ability to cope effectively with the anxiety-provoking situation is reinforced. In this way, the steps taken by Mary to address their phobia are monitoring thoughts by identifying and labeling the cognitive distortions, exposing to the conditioned stimulus to reprogram the response, analyzing the situation and restructuring the personal meaning, and working on ways to increase the belief that she can cope with the demands. Thank you very much.